when you take lower doses of Iboga, you see better, you hear better. General, your intuition, your intuitive faculties are brought and opened up. And so they have more success when going hunting. Also, it suppresses hunger and thirst. So they can basically go hunting for a very long time without eating and drinking and have this enhanced senses, which gives larger success with hunting. In this case, my initiate name is Etsing Ntsame.
Nice. What does it mean?
Ntsame is a word for God, and Etsing is a word for love.
People who are facilitating such experience should actually have their own
experience. I think to facilitate psychedelic experience without having ever had is like
common.
It's not good. It's not good. No,
common in our Western world.
Yeah, I think it's like someone who wants to teach you to drive a car who has never driven a car himself. Like you need psychedelic experiences to facilitate psychedelic experience, in my opinion.
V tomto podcastu nijak nevyzdvihujeme psychotropní účinky jakýchkoliv psychoaktivních látek a nikoho nenabádáme k jejich užívání. Cílem tohoto podcastu je přinášet objektivní informace, především o psychedelických látkách, a tím přispět k jejich destigmatizaci v očích široké veřejnosti.
Hello everyone. It is a great pleasure to welcome you in our next episode of CHEP's Tripcast, the first one in English. My name is Eva Cezarova, and on my right hand I have my friend and colleague Marek Nikolic, who you may have met in one of the previous episodes, and who is a therapist and a researcher in the National Institute of Mental Health. And on my left hand, I welcome our guest, foreign guest, Tobias Erny, who is a researcher and therapist, also currently an executive director of the Global Iboga Therapy Alliance, and who came today to tell us, to speak with us about Iboga and its potential. Hello.
Hi. Thank you for the invitation.
Hey Tobias, it's a pleasure to meet you.
Likewise.
So for those who never heard of Iboga, Iboga is actually a plant that has been used by traditional communities in Africa. And I am very curious to hear more about it. Would you introduce Iboga to us, please?
Sure. Iboga, or the shrub Tabernante Iboga, is a 1 to 2 meter tall shrub in Africa, and the root bark of the shrub is used for traditional initiations. Basically, the tribes there take very, very high doses of this root bark for a rite of passage into the adulthood. So children or teenagers who want to become a full grown-up member of the tribe take a very large dose of this, which induces up to several days lasting near-death experience. And they say in this near-death experience, your astral body detaches from the physical body and you wander in the astral realms. And then when you come back, you are reborn as a grown-up. They say in this initiation, the inner child dies and you come back as a full grown-up member of society, of this tribe. And basically they say to know about the astral dimensions, about the not material worlds, is something that you need to experience firsthand. People can tell you all they want about it, but if you have seen it, there's no need to believe anymore. It's like with fire. If you touched fire, you know it's hot and you are burned. And they say it's kind of the same thing with eating large doses of Iboga, and you go to the ancestral world, like the Bwiti cults, how they are called there, is an ancestral cult. So they see their dead grandparents, or they access the world of nature spirits, all these. And so they use this to initiate people into the astral worlds, but also they use it for healing for people who have severe sicknesses. Often in these latitudes there in Africa, there's a lot of belief of, let's say, nature spirits that are angry at someone, causing sicknesses, or jealousy of someone else, or witchcraft. And so if somebody has a severe sickness, they take also larger doses of Iboga, and so they can wander together in the astral world and see what is the spiritual cause of the sickness.
So,
And this is the higher doses.
Yeah.
They also use lower doses for a quite broad variety of different things. So, for example, for hunting, when you take lower doses of Iboga, you see better, you hear better. General, your intuition, your intuitive faculties are broad and opened up. And so they have more success when going hunting. Also, it suppresses hunger and thirst. So they can basically go hunting for a very long time without eating and drinking and have this enhanced senses, which gives larger success with hunting. And also they use it for as an aphrodisiac in smaller doses, or when they do ceremonies, they like to dance and they drum and they rattle, and so they take smaller doses of Iboga and they dance together. But you are only allowed to partake in this if you have had this initiatory dose, this higher dose.
what is usually the age when a boy is stepping into the adulthood?
So you would say there's something between 14 and 20, but I witnessed one time an initiation of a small toddler who couldn't walk, like he was really a baby, but he was also the son of the daughter of the head shaman or Nganga of the village. So he was somewhat in the succession line of becoming a next shaman of the village. He was initiated, he couldn't walk. And I have seen people initiated also when in their late 20s, early 30s. And often these initiations cost quite some money for the people there, because it's not like in an ayahuasca ceremony, there's one shaman and many people drinking ayahuasca with one or two shamans. And in an Iboga ceremony, because you take quite a while when you are in this Iboga realm, and a lot of people take care for you. So there are one or two people being initiated and 30 or 40 people watching over them and playing music for several days. And so these initiations are somewhat expensive for some. So they really save up quite a while, sometimes for some years, to be able to afford this, to be initiated. So there are also people being initiated in their late 30s.
It's so, just to come back to the spiritual world or to the astral world that you mentioned. So it sounds like that there is another world we are not aware of, and then we can experience it under the effect of Iboga, or maybe some other psychedelics as well. And then when the effect of the psychedelic substance goes away, are we still aware of it?
People say, and I have made the experience that people, after having such a really disruptive, transformative, pretty high-dosed experience, the channels are open for quite a while, and usually people tend to not forget what they have experienced. But what I have experienced with a lot of people when they come back in the Western world, and they are somewhat in the everyday trouble in everyday life, they tend to close down a bit again, because I think being as open as you are after such a initiation would not be very healthy in a city setting, because you hear everything very good. You see sometimes energies that people carry around, and in a city like, let's say, Berlin, Prague, New York, this would be maybe too much. So often people consciously or unconsciously close themselves down a bit to be able to work in a quite energetic, disruptive setting like cities.
And during the ceremony, I mean, it's super fascinating, the whole bit, and I have a lot of questions, but during the ceremony, is it similar to anything else, such as ayahuasca? Is there purging? Is there dancing? What's actually happening? What is the content of that?
So these initiation ceremonies, they are pretty long, like they sometimes last over several weeks. And so before, usually there are several days, sometimes even weeks of preparation, of cleansing. So you are not allowed to talk too much, you are not allowed to read, you are not allowed to have a cell phone in case you are a Westerner and always are used to have your cell phone. And they give you different types of drinks, herbal tinctures. You drink them and then you go to toilet a lot, or they give you also enemas. And yeah, there are these different little rituals that they do, like a fire ritual or a ritual where they ask the spirit world to hear to your intention. So this is a whole day of just the ritual of setting the intention and gathering the spirits to make them clear that what your intention is. And then they start you dosing with little doses. And there are all these other little rituals going on while this. And then at some point you get this really high-dosed ritual. Before that you are also steamed, and ritual washings are done a lot. So
when you say steamed, what do you mean?
It's basically like a huge smudging. You know, in ayahuasca ceremonies they often smudge you. And it's something where you sit on a special place and under you there is like a fire of a lot of herbs, and you are sitting in steam, and it's like a super intense smudging. Often also what I had to do is for 5 days I had to clean myself every day 5 times with a special plant bath. And so 25 times, so to say, in these 5 days. And while cleansing with these plants, I had to making aware or getting aware of what I want to change in my life, to really focus very much on this. And then when you are dosed with the really large dose, this was done in a forest setting. And first I was brought to a little hut, which was made out of banana leaves or palm leaves. And in this hut there were 4 or 5 people playing music to me with the traditional instruments. And then I had to, after some hours, I had to purge a lot. Like Iboga makes you also purge a lot very intensely. And then after this purging, I was considered clean enough to be brought to the temple. At this point, I was like gone. I don't remember how I was brought to the temple, but they made pictures and basically they carried me to the temple. And in the temple, I was lying, and there were several people using the traditional Bwiti instruments and playing music to me for over 2 days, 3 days. And yeah, in this journey, when you are not able to take Iboga anymore, they then come and give you enemas with Iboga when they think you should have more or should go deeper. And altogether this can last up to 2 weeks.
Wow. So you've done this 2-week journey.
Yes. And there are different traditions which make it sometimes a bit shorter. And there are some very intense traditions which spread it over something like a month or so. But yeah, common is between 1 and 2 weeks with the whole cleansing process beforehand.
And afterwards, a lot of traditions has some sort of integration back into reality. Maybe you shouldn't use the phone afterwards. What is it? What's happening here?
Afterwards, they talk. In my case, it was a lady, because it was a more matriarchal-oriented tradition. And so the head of the village lady asked me about my visions. And we analyzed together my visions, and depending or according to my visions and according to their interpretation of my visions, they gave me my initiate name and told me how to integrate or how to take this with in life.
Wow. Can you share your initiate name?
In this case, my initial name is Etsing Nzame.
Nice. What does it mean?
Nzame is a word for God, and Etsing is a word for love.
Okay, so you're the love god.
The Cupid?
Yeah, like or God is love, or in this direction.
Okay, cool.
Yes, loving God.
And so I assume this somehow sent you on a direction next into your life?
Yes.
Can you tell us more?
I went there, and generally I have a strong Buddhist background, where there's this concept of metta, which is a kind of love which is not eros, which is not philios, or which more direction agape, a kind of love that radiates from one towards all sentient beings. And in this initiation, I was also thinking and talking with them about how to embody, or how to be able to manifest this kind of non-directed love. Not like I love this, but I don't love there, but as a modus operandi, and a kind of love that is just radiating.
Okay. Well, I was expecting to hear about your other journey in your work life, but this is even more interesting. Cool.
Yes.
How long time ago was this initiation?
This was not so long ago. This was, I think this initiation was 2020.
So 4 years approximately.
Yes.
And would you feel that your life rapidly changed after that, or that like something really moved further?
The thing is, my first Iboga or Ibogaine journey was 2006. So I'm connected to this molecule much longer. And I somewhat already went through a lot of Iboga initiations, not in a traditional setting, not in Africa, but with myself, with friends, where we tried a lot of Iboga and Ibogaine in higher doses. So it was, for me, kind of coming to a place that I already knew, and also this hyperdimensional entity. Often people say there is this plant deva, or a plant spirit, and this was like meeting an old friend again, but this time not inviting this old friend to the European world, but going to his home, and therefore there he had a deeper, more profound power embedded in this whole ritual. But it was not something totally new. It was not that this was a massively life-changing experience, because I had these life-changing experiences with Iboga or Ibogaine already before.
Just before we maybe move more into the science, I still have 2 more questions. When you mentioned that they were carrying you to the temple, and you do not remember the journey, are you aware what was going on inside?
I was traveling through, I would say, a landscape of my subconsciousness. And just have like short flashes of what was happening in the material world, but I was much more in my subconscious traveling there.
And my second question, as studying quite a lot the South American approach of the indigenous tribes to ayahuasca, I tend to see it as a technology which they know how to operate. And therefore, then the technology works in a maybe deeper or stronger, more powerful way, which doesn't mean that us who do not operate the technology in these old ways would not be able to even start it. But maybe it just doesn't work one of the ways that it was designed for to go deep. So would you actually see the way how the African people work with Iboga, that we could use this perspective on it as well? Like, is it different when Western people use it and use it here without maybe knowing the certain keys that you need to press in order to have the gates open?
So I talked with an African Nganga, which is equivalent to a shaman, about this. And he said, you cannot copy and paste what we are doing here in Europe or in the United States or in a Western society, because the whole mindset of the people is totally different. So also there, the whole society, the whole village is basically spun around this. So everybody in this village knows what is going on, and everybody knows how to treat the persons who have been in there. And he said, if you want to use this as a medicine in your world, you have to kind of redefine the ways you can use our knowledge as a blueprint, but he thought it is impossible to just take this, make copy-paste and implement it there. So he kind of urged us to find or to develop ways that are accessible also to a Western mind, because a Western mind has total different belief systems than they grow up with. So he said, just taking what we do to there might be interesting for as an intercultural exchange, but to really work in healing, you need to redefine what we are doing to make it suiting in your latitudes.
Yeah. So where are we with this right now? Because historically, for example, I know Ibogaine's been isolated roughly 120 years ago or something like that. You could have purchased it in a pharmacy in the form of pills in France and maybe in some other countries of Europe. So could you maybe tell us about a little bit more about our Western use of Ibogaine and where are we today?
So it started, well, there are two different opposing ideas, but the most common is that it started with 1864, where a French marine doctor brought the plant to France, and there was classified and analyzed. And in 1901, two different teams, a French-Swiss and a Swiss team, isolated basically around the same time, some weeks in between, the Ibogaine as the main active alkaloid. And then Ibogaine was used in France as a microdosing pill. Basically, they prescribed it to treat neurasthenia and sleeping sickness and generally to boost the immune system, but very tiny doses. And these tiny doses, the whole thing was based on the observation that people taking Ibogaine in small doses worked better and harder. So the Germans, when they built the railroad from Douala to Yaoundé in South Cameroon, usually they were oppressing the local customs and wanted to bring Christianity. The French and the Germans, they were all not so nice with the local customs. But then they saw, if these people take small doses of Iboga, they work faster and harder and better, longer, stronger. So, okay, let them eat Iboga. And based on this observation in France, there was brought this, it's called Lambarene, or it was called Lambarene, microdosing Iboga pill, which was then quite famous also with mountaineers, sportsmen, as doping. It was then taken off the market in '69. Okay. When all this anti-psychedelic propaganda was done by the United States.
And why is that? Was it connected because we thought Ibogaine can be psychoactive, or?
Everything psychoactive. It was not specifically Ibogaine, but at this point, I think the United States urged the World Health Assembly, which was the executive organ of the World Health Organization, to put all psychedelic substances, mescaline, whatever, LSD and so on this list. And in this, there was also Iboga included. So it was not Iboga specific, but just everything psychedelic, psychoactive was taken out of the market then.
Right, and what happened after, right? So we had the psychedelic underground, we had undergrowth, we had the psychedelic renaissance. Where are we there with the Ibogaine? You don't hear about it so much.
Iboga was in the beginning. Then it has kind of a reputation as being a chunky medicine, because the first person that openly disclosed the anti-addictive properties of Ibogaine was Howard Lotzow, founder of GITA, of the Global Iboga Therapy Alliance. He somewhat by accident stumbled across the anti-addictive properties because in the early 60s he was basically trying every drug he could get his hands on, as a lot of teenagers in this time did. And he was also strung out on heroin. And then he, while being addicted to heroin, obtained some Iboga, took it, and all of a sudden he didn't have any urge for heroin, he didn't have any heroin withdrawal, and he didn't want to take heroin anymore. And he was pretty amazed by this. He was thinking, wow, what is this? So he brought it to some friends who were also heroin addicts, and most of them also stayed off heroin for a while.
Okay.
And with this, somewhat the underground Ibogaine movement started. And then it took quite a while, basically till the advent of the internet, till it got made public, because basically the pharmaceutical companies and universities and other researchers more or less were thinking, those hippies, what do they want? And didn't take them too serious. And then with the internet, the word spread, and it got more and more into the circles which are actually affected by drugs. So it started as a junkie medicine, more or less. And I remember back in 2006, there was Albert Hoffmann's 100th birthday party in Basel. And there was also something on Iboga, but Iboga was always in these conferences a bit like the unwanted sibling or something, because it was the junkie medicine, and it's much more fancy to be on acid or with MDMA or something. And so it was always a bit at the side. And then now more and more, Iboga gets, or is getting into the focus, because there is this huge opioid crisis. And also we are more and more developing new ways or exploring new ways how Iboga can help other sicknesses.
Before we get into that, do you have the personal experience, the phenomenology of being addicted to hard drugs and getting treated and getting help from Iboga? How does that feel? How does that go?
Yeah, so I stumbled across Iboga basically because I was a functioning heroin addict. I was in Basel in Switzerland in the pharmaceutical industry. I was working and we had access to a lot of substances, and I was trying a lot of these substances. And at some point I developed an heroin habit. I started off as taking heroin to come down from other substances. And then it went off to be a habit and a severe addiction. And at some point my boss said, hey, you're always so super strung out in work. This doesn't work anymore. See that you change something. And at that time Iboga was not very well known. But in these internet forums like Blue Light or these drug forums, there was always some word spread about Iboga. And then my boss was so nice to give me special Iboga holidays. You go 2 weeks off, take Iboga, come back, please be clean. And so I did this 2006 to kind of tackle my heroin addiction. And this then worked for a while. Then I had a relapse after half a year or 3/4 of a year. And I did Iboga again. And
so we're talking 1 dose of Iboga, and you said that wasn't the strongest or anything, and that worked for 3 months.
For more like
3/4.
3/4 of a year. More like 9 months.
Okay, 9 months. Yeah, there we go.
Something like that.
All right, and then you tried Iboga again when you started feeling the urges, cravings?
Yes, I then slowly, because I was basically living next to a place where the addicts were meeting. So it was just like going out of the house, and right there I could get everything. So I had a relapse, and then I took Iboga again. And then it worked again for close to a year. And then I had a tiny relapse again. And then I thought, nah, this doesn't work living there. and seeing every day, basically going to work, all these old friends and addicts. So I then changed locations, moved, and then it worked for much longer.
All right. So it seems to me it's not the Iboga alone, right? It's like you have to work with the substance. It gives you an opportunity.
Yes.
But you have to take it yourself.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, cool.
It's always also these circumstances.
We have in our therapeutic work, we have the experience that taking an addict, taking him out of his environment, giving him Iboga for, let's say, in a retreat for 2 weeks, and then putting him right back into the exact same environment where he was living his addiction before, you can basically set an alarm clock till he relapses, because maybe it's 3 weeks, maybe it's 3 months, depending a lot on different parameters like personal metabolism or psychological parameters also. But the best experience or the best results we have if people take the Iboga in a broader therapeutic context where they are not taken right directly to their old environment after the experience, but are able to somewhat ground and integrate the experience in a healthy environment where they can somewhat develop new routines, healthy routines, and as soon as they are somewhat solidified, then they can go back. And this has much more lasting, longer lasting results.
Okay, so before we delve into the neurobiology of it, which I'm very interested about, now we're kind of touching about the Global Alliance, Therapeutic Alliance around Iboga. So what is the story there? What are you guys trying, what are you doing? What are you guys trying to do?
So we're basically a collective of Iboga therapists, enthusiasts, researchers who want to somewhat get the, or make the substance more accessible, so that everyone who seeks Iboga or Ibogaine can get a safe and effective opportunity to do so. Iboga is not totally harmless, like let's say mushrooms or so, physiologically harmless, because Iboga also bears some dangers. And so we try to minimize the dangers, we try to do harm reduction, we try to connect different therapeutes who are all having different experiences, gather this experience and make a database of all these experiences.
Well, first thing that really strikes me, like, we talked about how it became illegal in 1969. So is this legal?
So it's, I think, one of the most diverse psychedelics worldwide seen, because, for example, in Germany, in Netherlands, in Austria, it's somewhat legal. It's not scheduled as a drug, so you can buy it in the internet and people sell it, and that's okay with the state. In Switzerland, in France, in Italy, it's illegal. In the United States, it's Schedule 1. In Sweden, it's also scheduled. In Brazil and in New Zealand and in South Africa, it's an official prescribable medicine. So if you have a license, you can prescribe it as a doctor.
Okay.
So it's worldwide that there's no consent. It's a super diverse field.
And what do you know about Czech Republic?
As far as I know, it's not regulated there.
Okay. So here, what does it mean it's not regulated? What does it mean if someone needs help with addiction and this?
So I don't know about the Czech laws. The German not regulated would mean if a doctor prescribes it with giving the promise of helping, of curing some sickness, it would be illegal because he would make a claim of something that is not an official accredited medicine,
right,
and prescribe it as a medicine. So not regulated in Germany means you could buy it in the internet, you can take it yourself. The guy who sells it, if he sells it saying, if you take it, you might get better, he might get trouble with the authority that regulates the medicines because he is making a claim that it's a medicine. If you sell it as, let's say, for gas chromatographic analysis or as a botanic specimen or as something that you smudge, that you can burn for incense. Then you can sell it legally, and if the person who buys it then takes it, it's something that the person who sells it didn't intend to. So it's this kind of gray area where it's somehow legal, but if you are a health professional prescribing it, you might get in problems.
Also, we have this law that is called the spreading toxicomania, which could put one into trouble, we can say. And eventually it just depends on what kind of state lawyer is there, and what kind of judge, and who's gonna make the who's gonna have the perspective on you.
Yes.
And so what does that mean for the Global Alliance Iboga therapist? Because you're not prescribing it and you're a harm reductionist. How can you provide it safely?
So there are countries where it's tolerated or where it's legal to have clinics. There in Mexico there are a lot of clinics. In Costa Rica there are a lot of clinics. In Portugal and in Spain there are clinics operating openly, and they are working also together with some of the state clinics. So one clinic in Portugal is quite close to an official hospital, and if they have any problems, the doctors of the hospital already know, the people from this clinic come and they have this type of clients, and so we know what to do, and the police knows what's going on, and they are tolerating it because they know it's an institution of healing. It's not something where people get more addicted, but actually the opposite.
Right.
What does one have to do in order to become an Ibogaine therapist?
So there is so far no official
Guidelines.
like curriculum or guide. There are some guidelines. Usually it's with Iboga, since Iboga is in some instance cardiotoxic, so you can have, it's not so easy on your heart. You can potentially die if you have some pre-existing heart conditions. So usually it's not one Iboga therapist, but it's a team. There are nurses, there are people who check your ECG. In best case scenario, there is also an emergency doctor on site who could potentially give atropine or things that are needed if your heart, if you have a cardiac arrest. So it's not being one person Iboga provider. Usually it's people who have had problems themselves and were helped by Iboga and have a lot of Iboga experience, together with a team of nurses, with a team of therapists, psychotherapists, and also sometimes spiritual counselors. So it's, best case scenario, it's a multi-faceted team again.
And this maybe explains, because the price of a session like that with Ibogaine is anywhere between $5,000 and $15,000.
Yes.
So your average junkie cannot probably access this.
Yes, this is more the high-level treatments. In Europe, there are some people who do it for something like 2,000, 2,500 euros, and this is you have to have a facility where people are monitored 24/7 for something like 5 or 7 days. So it's much more complex undertaking than giving mushrooms for one night and then having 2 or 3 following up sessions. So it's, the price reflects the complexity.
It sounds to me like, again, it's the whole village, the 40 people tending to.
Yes.
Do you think that people who are facilitating such experience should actually have their own
experience? I think to facilitate psychedelic experience without having ever had is like
common?
It's not good. It's not good. No,
Common in our Western world.
Yeah, I think it's like someone who wants to teach you to drive a car who has never driven a car himself. Like you need psychedelic experiences to facilitate psychedelic experience, in my opinion.
Awesome. I have a lot of questions. You have anything to hear?
You go.
So you've mentioned that it helps, for example, with addiction to heroin. So it somehow has to have a activity or agonist activity, possibly, on the opioid receptors. Exactly. I also saw in your lecture that it helps with nicotine addiction. So that now we're touching completely different types of receptors. Would you be able to tell us a little bit more about this neurobiology of where is it active in the brain? What does it do? What are these changes that we can observe?
So Ibogaine and its metabolite noribogaine are super diverse neuropharmacologically speaking. So you have this opioid-mu-kappa delta receptor agonism. You have also like the common psychedelics, this serotonergic receptor, 5-HT2A agonist, 5-HT3, 5-HT3D. But also it's somewhat similar to ketamine. It's an NMDA antagonist. And some people say that this is the part where the whole experience differs a bit from before you asked if it's similar to ayahuasca. And with ayahuasca, you are very involved with the Iboga. The quality of Iboga experience is often somewhat a bit dissociated. You relive certain elements of your life, but you have a somewhat more objective view on the things, which some people say could be this kind of dissociative component of the NMDA antagonism, just like ketamine. Then it also works on the glutamate system, other receptors in the glutamate system, not the NMDA. You have the acetylcholine system, like you said, the nicotinergic receptors, the muscarininergic receptors. And what is super interesting is for addicts as well as for example, Parkinson patients, is it somewhat helps or optimizes the dopamine metabolism. It helps with, there's a GDNF, which is a neurotrophic nerve cell growth factor. And Ibogaine is stimulating the GDNF production. And GDNF has been shown to stimulate the sprouting and the differentiation of dopamine neurons. So basically, the dopamine neurons in the ventral tegmental area and the substantia nigra are somewhat associated with the rewardment system, which is destroyed for addicts often. So addicts, not just heroin addicts, but also alcoholics or speed or cocaine addicts, meth addicts, if their rewardment system is totally destroyed and after the actual withdrawal, they have problems to feel happiness, to feel joy. And we had the experience that then microdosing of Ibogaine helps them to relearn joy and happiness from very fine stimuli, like a chocolate or a nice social interaction. And some people say this is due to this GDNF production stimulation, which helps the dopamine neurons to sprout and grow again. So it has a pretty diverse neuropharmacological spectrum.
That's fantastic. And when you say microdosing, how often are we dosing then?
There are different protocols. There are people who take daily. There are people who take every other day. Some people do something what I would call more macro dosing, not microdosing, which is on the weekends. They take a dose which is certainly not subperceptual, but perceptual, but not a trip dose. But in this macro dosing, people sometimes do a, let's say, equivalent to something like 50 micrograms of LSD or so, so that there is some psychological effect. And in this, they do a weekly review, like a meditative experience, which then lasts maybe 4 to 8 hours, something like this. So there are different protocols, and I think it's a personality type thing. Some people like to have a daily somewhat grounding or anchoring, because it's very centering if you take small doses. Other people like to do it weekly. Other people like to do it every other day. So what we do when we guide people through microdosing, we want the people to reconnect with their intuition. So there's not a one concept or one protocol fits everyone solution, but it's something that needs to be individually adjusted.
So when we talk about the classic tryptamine serotonergic, then we have now very solid evidence that there is no dependency. Well, there is more or less no dependency appearing even after taking psychedelics repeatedly, and especially in the model that we test now mostly is 1 or maybe 2 doses of psychedelics. Here now we're talking about taking a sub-psychedelic but perceptual dose on a daily or weekly basis, which triggers in me a question: can this, are we just replacing some drugs with another?
Usually what our experience shows that people stop these microdosing protocols even without being told to stop after something 3 to 6 weeks.
Okay.
They just don't have the urge anymore. So I think after this a period of enhanced neuroplasticity and kind of learning new behaviors and solidifying them, the microdosing is not needed anymore. This is somewhat different for Parkinson patients, but especially for people who tackle subtle addictions like nicotine or binge eating sugar or something.
Okay.
People who do these microdosing protocols for subtle addictions do them for between 3 and 6 weeks. Some people do maybe 2 months. And usually people then stop by themselves. And I've never experienced someone with an addictive Ibogaine habit pattern.
That's very interesting.
Maybe there is also a question: is it pleasurable if you use small doses or like microdoses? Is it actually?
It can be.
Okay.
It can be, but it must not be. Usually people get a bit more aware, and due to this heightened awareness, also often unwanted emotional patterns are surfacing. It's a bit like peeling very gently a layer of an onion away, and then some emotional layers are surfacing which are not necessarily pleasant or which people run away from. So people who do a sincere Ibogaine microdosing protocol often describe it as work rather than leisure. It's not something where you can drink a beer or two and kind of numb you away from your emotional garbage, but it's more a bit enhancing the emotional garbage. And so having such a thing, microdosing protocol, embedded with therapeutical backup helps a lot, because then the therapeutes can kind of tickle out whatever people run away from and stimulate the people to proactively change their habits or behaviors.
I'm very interested also in cannabinoid dependency, so basically weed smokers, right? Do you have an experience there?
So pharmacologically there is no interaction why Ibogaine should help weed smokers, not like with nicotine, for example.
Right.
But often what I just said is this people realizing or being more aware of their inner landscape, then sometimes stumble upon reasons why what they are running away from or why they are numbing themselves with continuously weed smoking. But it's not as breakthrough effective, I would say, as for opiate addiction, for example.
Okay, cool. Do you have questions?
Yeah, I think that we can slowly wrap it, but I would like to ask, what is the vision of the future? If you have a vision, if Gita has a vision of where is Iboga/Ibogaine going to, and what are actually the challenges and the worst scenarios, and maybe the best as well.
So I think a best case scenario would be a world where Iboga and Ibogaine are accessible openly to everyone who are searching for it in a as safe as possible setting, embedded in a larger therapeutic context, so that people have several weeks of pre-treatment therapy, working up to a treatment, and then after an Ibogaine treatment as quite disruptive intervention, having a post-integrative care where health professionals who are facilitating this post-integrative care know about Iboga and know about how to work with people who have undergone such a treatment. Because currently sometimes it happens that someone comes home from an Iboga treatment and says, I have talked to my dead grandfather, and this is then being pathologized as being psychotic, and they are given antipsychotic. This would be somewhat of a worst case scenario. And a best case scenario would be understanding of all people involved in the therapeutic process, how to work with Iboga and how it can implement it.
Where does the reciprocity stand?
There is, some people say, there is a shortage of Iboga because there are now so many people wanting Iboga. When traveling Gabon, and what I now know, how many people are growing this somewhat of a these rumors were brought into the world from 2012, 2014 on, that there is an Iboga shortage, and people took this to their heart. So there are now, as far as I know, more Iboga plantations all over the world than have ever been before. So there are now commercially growing a lot of people Iboga, also where it's not endemic, like people in Mexico and Costa Rica, in Bali, in northern Australia, and Ghana and Cameroon. So there are now, every day I get messages from people who want to get or make new Iboga plantations. Within Gabon, there are some undertakings to remunerate or to give money back to the people there. The original wisdom holders are the Babongo pygmies or the pygmies, and they are not always treated very nice also in Gabon, because the forests have a lot of treasures. There is gold, there is wood, there is oil. And the pygmies, they live originally as a nomadic lifestyle. So there are now some, Pindi is one of these organizations that are actually looking for making reservations for the pygmies, where the extractive industries are not allowed to go. There is a lot of things happening in the background there. Just currently there was a coup d'etat in Gabon. So before, the head of state in Gabon was, I mean, over generations, his family was the head of state. And they were, on the one hand, saying they want to do something for the forests. On the other hand, they were making millions and millions with extracting natural resources. So there is now somewhat of an atmosphere of change, because Omar Bongo, the head of state, was thrown over. But so far it's not very clear how or who is going to lead the new government. I mean, it's clear that it's somebody from the family still. So maybe it's just one power-greedy person exchanged with the next power-greedy person. But what I see is that a lot of people have interest in Bwiti and coming to Gabon and actually helping villages. And on the other hand, Iboga is being grown now so much more all over the planet than, let's say, 10 years ago. And really large scale, like I know of plantations having 40, 50,000 plants, and every year doing 5,000 new plants, and this is just one, and that there are many of these. So I think this really shortage of Iboga, due to this undertaking on spreading the word that there might be a shortage, a lot of people stood up and did something against this. And secondly, there's a way of getting Ibogaine semi-synthetically from Wakanga, which is already cultivated largely in Ghana. So you can make the Ibogaine molecule without actually harvesting Iboga plants. There are also undertakings from other people how to isolate Iboga molecules from endemic plants in Mexico. So I don't think there will be a shortage, and because of the effort of a lot of people, there is, I think, not such thing as a really dangerously extinguished Iboga plant.
I have another topic I would like to touch on, and you already briefly mentioned. We spoke about all these positive effects of Iboga. Is there any warnings that you would like to share? Because you mentioned it can be hard on the heart. So could we touch on this?
I mean, it can be really dangerous, and people can walk through their life for 50 years without knowing that they have a pre-existing heart condition. So if people want to take a larger dose of Iboga, I'm not talking microdoses, but like seriously psychedelic initiatory doses, if the provider does not ask for an ECG beforehand, this is a huge red flag. And there are a lot of providers out there who are doing it in this, let's call it kamikaze style. And because of this kamikaze style, there are every now and then people dying from it.
Which so there was 19 deaths in US alone since early 2000, something like that.
Yeah, these are the reported deaths, and there are more. This one paper that I think you're referring to is just in a short period between 2000 and 2008, I think, or till 2008. Since that time, the Iboga initiations somewhat skyrocketed because of the opiate epidemic, and with this also there were more death cases. So there are people and Ibogaine clinics who have done thousands of Ibogaine treatments without having one death case. So if you know what you're doing, you can actually facilitate this in a very safe way. But there are always people who are just doing kamikaze style. And so if you or anybody out there wants to do an Ibogaine higher dose treatment and the provider does not ask minimum for an ECG and heart reading to rule out any potential pre-existing heart conditions, this would be a huge no-go.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you both for coming today and holding space for this talk. Thanks also to everyone who has been listening this first English podcast of the Czech Psychedelic Society, and looking forward till the next one.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.